Good evening, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Shirley Tilghman, and I serve on the Board of Trustees of the Institute for Advanced Study. And so it is a great pleasure to welcome all of you to the celebration of the republication of Abraham Flexner's 1939 seminal essay on the nature of scientific discovery entitled The Usefulness of Useless Knowledge. As someone who has been described as the oldest living molecular biologist who has not started a company, I am especially grateful that Flexner's work, along with a wonderful companion essay by Robbert Dijkgraaf, the current director of the Institute, has been brought back into the light by Princeton University Press. This strikes me as an especially auspicious time to reissue Flexner's clarion defense of the crucial role that unfettered curiosity and imagination play in human progress, not just in the sciences, but in the humanities and the social sciences as well. As Vannevar Bush, the architect of post-World War II science policy in the United States, wrote in 1945, "Scientific progress on a broad front results from the free play of free intellects, working on subjects of their own choice in the manner dictated by their curiosity for exploration of the unknown." As we witness with dismay the ongoing assault on the value of scientific knowledge and the confusion over the distinction between facts and alternative facts, there can be no better inspiration for why discovery matters than the two essays we celebrate today. To begin our discussion, I'm pleased to introduce someone who needs no introduction at the Institute. And of course, all of us know when people say that, they still introduce the speaker. And I'm going to follow suit. Robbert Dijkgraaf, the director and Leon Levy professor of the Institute for Advanced Study since 2012. Robbert is a mathematical physicist who has made significant contributions to the field of topological string theory. For those contributions, Robbert has received the Spinoza Prize, the highest scientific award in the Netherlands, and has been named a Knight of the Order of the Netherlands Lion. Very impressive. He is also a member of two of the United States' most prestigious honorific societies, the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and the American Philosophical Society. However, Robbert's contributions to science extend well beyond the laboratory, or in his case, the proofs on a piece of paper or on a blackboard. He became a prominent policy advisor and public spokesperson for the importance of scientific advances in his native country of the Netherlands, where he served as president of the Royal Netherlands Academy of Arts and Sciences, and internationally as president of the Inter-Academy Partnership, a global network of scientific academies. Robbert is also a trained artist, writer, and popular lecturer. His annual televised lectures on science attracted more than 1 million viewers in the Netherlands, and he writes a monthly column for Holland's top newspaper. Robbert, congratulations on the publication of your essay, which he entitled The World Tomorrow, which is such an important addition to making the case for what Abraham Flexner called the usefulness of useless knowledge, the curiosity-driven inquiry and original thought that are critically important for future innovation and scientific progress. Robbert.
Thank you, Shirley, for these wonderful words and also for participating in the panel discussion that's upcoming. Of course, also for your friendship and leadership as a trustee of the Institute and your wonderful advocacy for basic research during your whole life, in particular here as president Emerita of Princeton University, and I think you should be a knight in the Order of the American Tiger. Also, want to thank the other Peter Dougherty, who will be here in a moment, leading the panel discussion as director of Princeton University Press and publisher of the book, and of course as the originator of the idea to republish. And without you, this book wouldn't be here. And of course Vartan Gregorian, that actually will play an important role in the ceremony in a moment. I'm particularly honored to stand here and to be a co-author with Abraham Flexner. And so when the book came out, I thought, well, this should be a wonderful quote of Einstein. And then I want to put it on the cover, like, I strongly recommend this book. So I looked in the ultimate quotable Einstein, which has 578 pages, to see whether there's a quotation. Flexner turned out to be one. So I was lucky. And the quote is the following: Flexner, the former director of the Institute, is one of the few enemies I have here. So then I suggested on the book, Einstein, a book by one of my few enemies. It would sell anyhow, I think. Well, the Institute is extremely lucky to have kind of a founding manifesto, which we are kind of republishing today, the essay by Abraham Flexner. Although it was published in 1939, in its first form, it appeared basically in 1921 when he was executive secretary of the General Education Board of the Rockefeller Foundation. And through his depth of analysis, it's slowly grown to the present form. So who was Abraham Flexner, and how did he arrive at this firm belief in the power of unfettered scholarship? Well, he was born in 1866 in Louisville, Kentucky. He was one of 9 children of Jewish immigrant families. He had a very tough youth. They lost their business in the panic of 1873. But with the help of his brother, older brother Jacob, he was able to attend Johns Hopkins University, which in many ways was the beginning of the modern research culture in the United States. President Gilman, I think, was actually one of the founding fathers of postgraduate research here in this country. And I think Flexner's exposure to that atmosphere was key in the rest of his life. He remained a lifelong critic and reformer of teaching and education and research. He got his bachelor degrees only 2 years in classics, returned to Louisville, where he started his own school, but he rose to public attention in 1908 with the book The American College Criticism. And already then he was criticizing the kind of superficial approach in modern education. But his main claim to fame was the 1910 report, often called the Bombshell Report, which was commissioned by the Carnegie Foundation on the state of medical education in the United States, in North America, in fact. 155 schools he analyzed. And I think that report still is the dream of anybody who ever served on any committee, because it led to the closure of half of the medical schools and a wide reform of all others. And he didn't hesitate to label institutions as disgraceful, shameful, even fictional. And my favorite words are Chicago, which is described as the plague spot of the country. Very soon he joined as I said, the General Education Board for the Rockefeller Foundation and became incredibly influential both in the world of higher education and philanthropy. It's in this capacity that his ideas underlying the essay formed. And as I said, it would be finally published in 1939, but it had a long gestation period. In these years, Flexner toured the world. He very precisely analyzed the structures that he saw, the modern research universities and institutes in Germany, the ancient colleges in Oxford and France, and he kind of crystallized his ideas in the Rhodes lectures that he gave in 1928 in Oxford when he was in residence at All Souls. That book, Universities, American, English, German, was very influential and very successful. Well, you all know that the rest was history, that in fact he was given the wonderful opportunity to actually embody his ideas by the creation of the Institute for Advanced Study, that in many ways really exemplified his attitude towards research and scholarship. The mission of the Institute, of course, turned out to be much larger than originally envisioned. I find it very touching to read the correspondence in April 1933 among Flexner and trustees to see exactly what the Institute should do when the crisis in Germany came to full fruition. And the wonderful words, actually Flexner describing that this institute was created to provide jobs for American scientists and scholars. And at some point he's saying, well, if you give me another 100 Einsteins, I can do something. And then slowly it emerged that actually the mission of the institute was not only an American mission, but was actually worldwide. And I love to quote from his last director's report, which is in May 1939, where he writes, "We are living in an epoch-making time. The center of human culture is being shifted under our very eyes. It's now being unmistakably shifted to the United States. 50 years from now, the historian looking backward will, if we act with courage and imagination, report that during our time, the center of gravity and scholarship moved across the Atlantic to the United States." Quite a visionary statement. And Flexner did as much as anyone to make all of this happen. And when he died at the age of 92 in 1959, he was widely celebrated as kind of an American hero. Now, it's remarkable that this essay appeared in October 1939, and I just look, here's the Harper's magazine, the original copy, and it's interesting to see what was the competition, what were the other titles. And so the main thing is Old People, a Rising National Problem. Roosevelt, the Rich Man's Alibi. The Future of the British Empire, which indeed was bleak. Great Hawaii, and In Defense of Ghostwriting, which is quite appropriate to me. It's quite remarkable that Flexner himself demonstrates the essay of, and the long-term use of useless research in terms of electromagnetism. He spends a lot of time explaining the case of Marconi and radio transmission, how it's remarkably changed our world. In the accompanying essay, I actually point out that two of the great developments at that very time, both coming out of very esoteric subjects, namely studying elementary particles and the nuclei of atoms, and studying kind of mathematical proof, led to the birth of nuclear physics, nuclear arms, and computers. And in fact, both of them were in gestation right here at the Institute for Advanced Study. So looking back on the essay, in some sense it's very easy to give further examples of this remarkable phenomena, how undirected scholarship can give remarkable results. As I point out, perhaps the key example is quantum mechanics, that of course started as a very esoteric field, particularly something for young physicists. In German it was called Knabenphysik, like young boys physics, with very little immediate consequences. And I think now we can argue that to understand anything in the world, any material subject, you have to understand quantum mechanics, from the life sciences to the material sciences. And it has been estimated by economists that in the world, roughly 30% of the US gross national product is based on inventions made possible by quantum mechanics, whether it be lasers, microprocessors, or other forms of nanotechnology. If you think about the advent of quantum computers, this percentage will only grow much further. As I point out in the book, perhaps the most successful grant ever made, the most successful investment ever made by the federal government was the 3.5 million grant made by the National Science Foundation to Stanford for a search algorithm. It led to the Google company with an estimated market value now of more than 500 billion, which means an investment return of a factor of 100,000. Very difficult to get that from your stock market. So there are many, many lessons learned. And in some sense, I think, if you look at the immediate days after this essay appeared, the days after World War II, was a time of great optimism. Now, although the terrible war years were fresh in everybody's memory, and one was confronted daily with the Cold War, it's remarkable how the modern scientific enterprise was built. Now, it's hard to be as optimistic these days. I think, and we'll discuss this further, we see a steady decline in the support for research, particularly basic research. I would say scholarship and research are at risk. We have seen a gradual decline of research funding as a percentage of GDP. It was 2.1% at the height of the Cold War. It's now less than 0.8%, roughly half of it being spent on defense. We see plunging rates of success for young scholars. In fact, young scientists are under great stress. The opportunities in the world have not kept up with the urgency of research, the increased worldwide pool of talent, the cost of research, and I think perhaps even more important, the modern knowledge society that's based on technology and innovation. We see very threatening phenomena that try to point out a particular lack of support for basic research. We see a shift towards predictable, boring products, some kind of regression to the mean. We see risk aversion in many kind of grants. One try to exclude downward risk, but of course also is excluding the upward risk, which is proven so incredibly important in the past. We see kind of a narrowing of error bars worldwide and a tyranny of metrics, that is the calculation of success in advance of scientific projects. We are counting instead of weighing research. This actually especially hurts the humanities and the social sciences, whose usefulness is even more difficult to quantify. And I think we'll be able to discuss the present climate, in particular the kind of fearsome attacks on the National Endowment of the Humanities and the Arts. But I would argue there's even a greater risk, which is that the basic values of science are under threat. Somebody asked me if I could wave a magic wand and make people understand one thing, what would I pick? And my answer was the scientific method, because that actually will lead to a lot of other things. I think actually society needs the products of basic research and curiosity-driven breakthrough scholarship, but it even more needs to embrace our scientific culture of accuracy, of truth-seeking, of questioning, critical questioning, of healthy skepticism, of respect for facts, respect for uncertainties, and also very important, wonder at the richness of nature and the human spirit. The motto of the Institute is truth and beauty, and in fact they go along. In terms of my introductory words, I actually desperately feel, the last word should be given to Flexner. And I want to quote just the first paragraph of his essay, and I really recommend all of you to read it, because I think it didn't lose any of its relevance, it only gained in relevance. In many ways, his essay, I feel, is the exhibit A of the title of the book, how useful it is now, so many years later. Let me quote the first paragraph. Is it not a curious fact that in a world steeped in irrational hatred which threatens civilization itself, men and women, old and young, detach themselves wholly or partly from the angry current of daily life to devote themselves to the cultivation of beauty, to the extension of knowledge, to the cure of disease, to the amelioration of suffering, just as though fanatics were not simultaneously engaged in spreading pain, ugliness, and suffering. The world has always been a sorry and confused sort of place, yet poets and artists and scientists have ignored the factors that would, if attended to, paralyze them. And I think that actually is the strength of the report. Some people ask me, would you have written a different essay if you know the outcome of the presidential elections? My answer is no, I think, because in many ways, Flexner shows us that these are timeless values. Now, it's a fine Dutch tradition that if you publish a book, that the first copy is given to a guest of honor. Someone who, in some sense, is important to you and exemplifies the central thesis. Now, let me quote a description of the person I had in mind. The son of immigrant parents, reared in poverty and hardship, he was instrumental in influencing philanthropic foundations to endow more than $500 million to American education and in opening doors to research and experiment. No other American of his time has contributed more to the welfare of this country, and humanity in general. Now, this is not describing Vartan Gregorian, it's actually describing Abraham Flexner in this obituary that appeared on the front page of the New York Times. Abram Flexner was not available to receive this copy, but I think the next best thing is Vartan Gregorian. And actually, the words are appropriate. Only $500 million is not describing you, Vartan. I think it has to be increased by at least a factor of 100. Of course, this is a special year. As you know, Vartan Gregorian is the president of the Carnegie Corporation, president Emeritus of Brown, of the New York Public Library, and actually this year, 30 years as a trustee of the Institute for Advanced Study. He joined in 1987, the same year that Marvin Goldberger became the Institute's 6th director. During his tenure, he's been instrumental in identifying and securing the subsequent directors, Philip Griffith, Peter Dougherty, and myself. And on a good day, you see all three of us in the dining hall. And in case of any doubts, he still has all the receipts. Vartan's deep understanding of the Institute and its value has been reflected in all his engagements. And you are such a passionate advocate, leader, and indelible friend and benefactor that I couldn't think of a better person to hand this copy. The year before Vartan joined the Institute board, he was the subject of a two-part New Yorker profile called The Phenomena of Vartan Gregorian. And there's a long list of metaphors that can be applied to him. I just quote a few. Benign force of nature, a living landmark, the most unique individual I've ever known, and my favorite, he has the innocence of a baby, the integrity and dedication of a saint, and the political skills of a Talleyrand. There are many awards and memberships, too many to mention. I'll just mention here the National Humanities Medal, awarded to him in 1998 by President Clinton, and the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the nation's highest civil award, presented to him by President Bush in 2004. Most recently, in February, in fact, he received the Medal of Chevalier of the French Legion of Honor. Vartan was born in Tabriz, Iran, of Armenian parents, received his elementary education in Iran and secondary education in Lebanon. He then entered Stanford. I would say the rest is history. History in the sense he has taught history, but he made history in California, Texas, and Pennsylvania. And to the Institute, he has brought a wealth of experience and wisdom. His ability to articulate the most meaningful aspects of the Institute's contribution to knowledge and society have inspired us all and will continue to provide counsel for future generations. His rigorous and exultant devotion to the power of education and the hope it provides has inspired us to reach for our highest inspirations. He is always supporting scholars and scientists who boldly dedicate their lives to exploration, curiosity, and learning. But I think I can't give him a higher compliment to say, you are a second Abram Flexner. It gives me great pleasure to offer you the first copy of this book.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I did not realize I had come to hear my obituary. But I'm glad that you're not going to change the text of it when I, as they say, kick the bucket when the time comes. Well, what can I say? While reading the correspondence of two legendary scientists, Max Born and Albert Einstein, I was astonished to find that Einstein, in his inimitable fashion, went right to the heart of the matter, asserting that materialists try to explain the phenomena by cause and effect. But Einstein says this way of looking at things always answers only the question, why, but never the question, to what end. No utility of principle and no natural selection will make us get over that question. In a famous essay published in 1940 that created quite a stir at the time, Einstein even suggested that it is, and I quote, the grandeur of reason incarnate in existence, which appears to be religious in the highest sense of the word. I mention this because he believed, Einstein and others, unity of knowledge. There were no artificial barriers between disciplines of knowledge. Knowledge was one. Unity of knowledge was essential. It included both physical sciences, it included mathematical sciences, natural sciences, name it, historical sciences, and also social sciences. All were unified to bring glory to the intellect, discovery of questions. I had to confront the issues of science and humanities as a student when I read the work of the 17th century French scientist and religious philosopher Blaise Pascal. For me, he summed up in a poetic way the question Einstein and others have posed. To what end? I paraphrase Pascal's answer. I know not who put me into the world, nor what the world is, nor what I myself am. I am in terrible ignorance of everything. I find myself tied to one corner of this vast expanse of the universe without knowledge why I'm put in this place rather than another, or why the short time I have to live is given to me now rather than at another given time in the whole of eternity. I see nothing but infinities on all sides, which has surrounded me as an atom and as a shadow that endures only for an instant and returns no more. The eternal silence of these infinite spaces frightened me. In that sense is what this book is very important, because it comes out to praise the unity of knowledge. Abraham Flexner's book could have been titled, following Erasmus, In Praise of Folly as in Praise of Curiosity. It's a tribute to human mind and spirit, as well as to the cultivation of curiosity, which without thought to ideas' immediate application has led to all kinds of discoveries, which Robbert Dijkgraaf has done in a tremendous preface, introduction, service by writing a wonderful text, original text, which first appeared as a companion to 1939 Flexner's essay, which I have the original here. I was going to give to Robbert, but Robbert already has the original. It raises three issues for me, and Robert's book emphasizes it. Reiterating the importance of unity of science and knowledge, reinforcing the importance of academic freedom, especially now, where we need to be sure we don't lose it or we don't modify it and we don't try to reinterpret once again. It reinforces the importance of fostering artistic and humanistic creativity alongside with scientific discovery and creativity. Unity of science, Flexner denounced the idea in the unity of science that science could or should not be based on racial or religious predilections. He wrote, and I quote, "Does humanity want symphonies and paintings and profound scientific truth, or does it want Christian symphonies, Christian paintings, Christian science, or Jewish symphonies, Jewish paintings, Jewish science, or Mohammedan or Egyptian or Japanese or Chinese or American or German or Russian or communist or conservative contributions to and expressions of the infinite richness of the human soul?" The answer is, of course, no. He denounced German and Italian universities that tried to clamp down on the freedom of the human spirit, his term for academic freedom. He wrote, "Universities have been so reorganized that they have become tools of those who believe in a special political, economic, or racial creed." He also defended artistic and humanistic creativity. The real enemy is the man, he said, who tries to mold the human spirit so that it will not dare to spread its wings. He upheld the idea that every individual who values his immortal soul will be true, writing justification of spiritual freedom goes, however, much farther than originality, whether in the realm of science or humanism, for it implies tolerance throughout the range of human dissimilarities. This is why the Institute for Advanced Study is so important, and that's why Robert's introduction to this wonderful essay is very important. Robert cites great scientists that made possible two revolutions: quantum revolution, nuclear revolution, but also computer revolution. two major movements in the United States launched on behalf of all scientists of the world. But I'd like to also mention Robbert needs a now companion volume, next edition, second, third, fourth edition, because he'll be going around country lecturing on this. And therefore, the other should be contributions of Flexner to humanities and to history, historical and other sciences and artistic things in the Institute, because the Institute also, alongside of all the great scientists, had George Kennan's, Glenn Bowersox, Oleg Grabar, but most importantly, Albert Hirschman and all the others, Morton White, to show how they complement the humanistic traditions, scientific tradition complement in order to provide that part of the knowledge, but totality of the knowledge. The importance of theoretical research is very important, naturally. When I received a copy of this book, I also received a copy of The Economist this week. Maybe you've seen it. It's the Technology Quarterly, Quantum Devices. Wonderful article. Does not mention Einstein, does not mention Institute for Advanced Study, does not mention anything, because many of the organizations and writers are victims of presentism. They live in the prisoner of presence because they think only presence what counts. Anyway, when I received this, I tried to compare the two texts. According to article, quantum computers and stimulators should eventually be capable of solving some of science's most basic and yet most daunting questions. Sensors of unparalleled precision may at last make it possible to test the predictions of physicists' most abstract ideas, perhaps linking the theories of quantum mechanics and gravity. The article also includes information on the countries leading in authorship on quantum computing, with the US and China far ahead in the field. 4,886 from the United States, 4,232 from China. Number 3, Britain, 1,700, Japan, 1,500, Canada, 1,200, and all the others are below 1,000. However, it's Robbert Dijkgraaf's foreword, the foreword which I read, Usefulness of Useless Knowledge, that provides important historical context to the issue, unlike the Economist issue. He described the impact of quantum theory, as you heard, to MRI, GPS, and all kinds of other human genome projects, all of which have had immense consequences in the field of health and transportation, but that were not what they were designed for. They were products of curiosity, not products of patent. This led me to see when the first patent appeared. Believe it or not, I read history of science to find out that for Muslims who were so advanced during the Middle Ages, for Chinese who were so advanced in science, science belonged to the emperor. For Muslims, science belonged to the people. It was Venetians in 1475 that patented scientific instruments, and instruments became royalty-bearing. They're the ones who established 50-year patent, which not has changed. What I'm saying is that science used to be unified, universal, but now it has been compartmentalized. Robert's also cites MIT study, which he did not mention, notes the scientific discoveries in the nuclear and computational realms have given rise to more than 30,000 companies in the United States, with some 4.6 million employees. Somebody should tweet this to President Trump to say how many jobs have been created by scientists, greatest technologies and others, including some of the great companies, includes Texas Instruments, McDonnell Douglas, and Genentech. Timelessness of republication of usefulness of useless knowledge. I welcome the passage, but it's also, as well, I'm glad that Robbert will be giving lectures on this book in Chicago, New York, Brooklyn. It's part of New York, but then if people don't recognize. Palo Alto, Wales, London, and I also hope Amsterdam. So the return of prodigal son will come with the smallest book ever, yet most important book ever. Now, two issues also I should mention. I share Robert's concern that our major research universities, especially public ones, the pride of American higher education, are on the decline. All the people who make so much money, companies, at the expense of scientific discovery sponsored by federal government, put only 6% of business, of all the research, pure theoretical research, 6% is only put by businesses. 53% is put by federal government. Those, therefore, who develop applied technologies on the basis of scientific thought that is sponsored by philanthropy, by government, should return in kind at least a portion, at 1%, 2%, 3%, in order to replenish the coffers that bring more innovation, more progress. But unfortunately, that's not the case. So the budget of NIH has declined by 25%. GDP, as Robert mentioned, support of US science used to be 2.1% in 1964, now 0.8%. Most of it, half of it at least, for defense projects. But we need educated public, philanthropists and others to support pure, not necessarily applied alone, but pure research, theoretical research. Now, I'm very sad that it's in the age of technology, science is not as much coveted as technology, because it's applicable, you can see it, benefits and others, but nobody links the two. Nobody discusses the scientific method. And I agree, in our universities, if there's one mandatory course we should teach, it is scientific method. And then I want to end my remarks by also saying that the United States can no longer afford to leave off tragedies of other nations which have benefited us. Tragedies of Germany, tragedies of Japan, tragedies of Russia, Soviet Union, tragedies of fascist Italy, where all their scientists and other writers, philosophers, emigrating to the United States. We have to cultivate our own also. In order to do that, we cannot rate other countries. We will welcome them as scholars, welcome them as refugees. They have done more than anybody, but also we have to invest in our own homegrown as well, because we cannot afford to lose ground if we intend to give our economic situation which we are and the freedoms that we enjoy. Finally, let me, since I am in the presence of a Dutchman, it comes at appropriate time because I believe not only the objectivity, believe in facts, but also everything is on the defensive now, as you mentioned. Therefore, I'll end up, I might as well quote Erasmus, another Dutchman. So please allow me to end up with a pedantic note. Erasmus once told an apocryphal story of a poorly educated Catholic priest saying Latin Mass, who reciting the post-communion prayer of God, or subsimus Domine, what we have received in the mouth, Lord. Instead of subsimus, we have received, said the word mamsimus. After being made aware and chastised for his mistake, he nevertheless persisted with his erroneous version, either from stubborn force of habit or from refusing to believe it was a mistake. He said, I prefer my mamsimus to your subsimus. In the age of mamsimus, we are today in the age of mamsimus, when people are preferring their facts, alternative facts, to real facts, because after all, they're entitled to. I remember Roman Hraska, the senator from Nebraska, when a Supreme Court justice nominate, was turned down because he was too mediocre. He said, mediocre Americans deserve a mediocre justice. We can't afford that anymore. There are too many people now who would not quote Moynihan, who said that everyone is entitled to his or her own opinion, but not to his or her own facts. And we in America today have to be guarding institutions such as Institute for Advanced Study, integrity of our universities, integrity of scientists, humanists, philosophers, and others, because a life is a terrible thing to waste. A mind is a terrible thing to waste. So I'd like to congratulate Robbert for this, thank all of you for coming, and please keep the Institute alive and well, and please also don't abandon our public research universities, because they remind me of that one of the 1001 Night stories when the owner of a racehorse decided to experiment not to feed the horse. After 1 week, 2 weeks, 3, 4 weeks, and so horse dies. What happens is, by the time I had trained the horse how to live without eating, it died. We cannot afford to gradually strangle our institutions of higher education, that as long as there is no crisis, they're doing all right. They're not doing all right. They're our future, they're pride of our nation, and our major export in the world. No other export is matched other than maybe Hollywood, the importance of centrality of higher education. With that, I'd like to thank you. Robbert, congratulations, and thank you for coming, ladies and gentlemen, to hear my funeral.
It is now my honor to introduce the moderator of our panel and the publisher of the volume we celebrate today. Peter Dougherty has been the director of Princeton University Press since 2005, and before that, he was the economics editor of the press. He has served as the president of the Association of American University Presses and on the board of the American Association of Publishers. He teaches at the University of Denver's Publishing Institute and sits on the advisory council of Rutgers University Press and the editorial board of the Princeton University Library Chronicle. Over the past decade, Peter has led the press in publishing books that, to use his own words, serve the scholarly community and the world of ideas at the highest level of excellence. PUP books have garnered many awards during his tenure, including the Pulitzer Prize, the Bancroft Prize, and the National Book Critics Circle Award. Indeed, 2006 was a banner year for the press, with publications being honored with more than 140 prizes. It seems only appropriate that PUP is with us today celebrating the publication of Flexner's and Dijkgraaf's essays. After all, the press, which predates the Institute by 25 years, became the first to publish Albert Einstein's book, The Meaning of Relativity, in the United States in 1922. So the two institutions have been joined for many years. Please join me in welcoming Peter Dougherty.
Thanks, Shirley, and thanks everyone. It's a great privilege for us at Princeton University Press to join with the Institute for Advanced Study in publishing the Usefulness of Useless Knowledge, a book that I have come to regard as a manifesto reflecting the Institute's very ideals and values. And I'm pleased to express my thanks to the Institute team and a few of my colleagues at the press for the progress we've made thus far in publication. First, I'd like to thank Robbert Dijkgraaf and his Institute colleagues, especially Kelly Devine Thomas and Christine Ferrara, for bringing this book into being and working with us at the press to get it the exposure that it's received so far. This is the second book we've published in recent years in partnership with the Institute, the first being its 80th anniversary volume, A Community of Scholars, in 2011, and it's a pleasure to be joining forces again with this extraordinary group of people. I'd also like to thank two PUP colleagues who have done the heaviest lifting in getting this great book into publication. They are respectively Colleen Boyle, our publicist, who's been promoting the book with some success with the media. Colleen is here with us tonight. And Eric Henney, our physics and computer science editor, who has worked on this book right from the start, who couldn't be here. He's out visiting universities looking for more books full of useless knowledge. I should also acknowledge the work being done this week at the London Book Fair by our UK-based colleagues who are promoting the book with European media and also pitching translation rights to foreign language publishers from all over the world. Publishers are always telling authors to keep their books short so that they will be attractive for translation. In this case, at 104 pages and in a small format, we have no excuse for failure. To paraphrase the press's mission, Princeton University Press publishes books that connect authors and readers in order to advance and enrich the human conversation. The crucial word in this sentence is the predicate, connect. Traditionally, university presses say that they disseminate knowledge, but dissemination has always sounded to us like crop dusting. We are more interested in connecting, mainly through creative publicity and also the imaginative use of technology for media outreach. And in my 25 years at the press, I cannot think of a book that better enlists the need to connect than The Usefulness of Useless Knowledge. In this case, our job is not only to connect this vitally important book and its ideas to a scholarly conversation, but also to a public conversation, a discussion demanding much greater awareness of these ideas and their relevance to the future. So a large part of the challenge for us as publishers is to help rebuild the public conversation, even as we work to inform it. And so it is in this context of enhancing this broader public conversation and rebuilding a conversation that seems to have fallen off the cliff that I'd like to kick off this evening's discussion with our panelists, each of whom need no introduction, and at this stage will not get an introduction from me. So I would like to take a seat and we'll get started. Thank you. I'd like to start with a question for Robbert Dijkgraaf. Publishers like me are intensely aware of the importance of book titles. And there are a few titles as compelling and confounding as the tongue-twisting usefulness of useless knowledge. Robbert, what does this phrase mean? How does it exemplify Abraham Flexner's original insight? And what did you realize when you began to revisit and enhance Flexner's ideas with your essay?
I think the title is indeed magnificent. I remind at some point we were doing a very large report with the academies, and then somebody asked, well, are you able to capture the essence of the report in a tweet? And I think actually in some sense that is a very important question, and in many ways it's the title by itself makes the case. Right. It's also interesting to know that the idea of useful knowledge is something that has a long history. In fact, many of the institutions that came out of the Enlightenment, you know, from the American Philosophical Society, so they explicitly mention the idea of useful knowledge. In some sense, no, knowledge used to be useless, in the sense it was for our own internal growth and appreciation of the world.
It's a term of art in the field of economic history.
And as I said in my introduction, I think it's kind of remarkable how visionary Flexner's words were. I think it's, you might think, well, you might have to, in many ways he's even more articulate and more on the message. And I think that many of us these days are. Right. He's kind of totally unvarnished defense. And as I said, the fact that he made that case in kind of the worst of times brought for me the essence even much closer. I think it's, by the way, also interesting that you learn, of course there are many other examples, but in some sense his examples are as powerful, indeed, using this microphone, thinking about electromagnetism. In some sense I was disappointed that, first of all, that there isn't I would say, the scientific research, the economic research, etc., that really makes the case much more convincing. Right. And I find it kind of depressing that 17 plus years later, we're still in a position where you have to make the case. Well, and that science itself progressed so exponentially, really exponentially. Right. But us making the case for science, we have seen very little progress.
Right. Well, it is a counterintuitive idea. And I think it's for that reason that we have to continue to make the case, and I suspect 100 years from now it will have to be made again. And it's certainly the case that we see the publication of this book as a watershed opportunity to remake this case, and we look for other ways of connecting it to this ongoing conversation. Got more questions here.
Can I respond
Sure.
to
I insist.
to the question? So I remember the first time I heard about this essay, and I have to say, as a scientist, I winced at the idea of useless knowledge, in part because I had spent most of my career defending the generation of new knowledge as one of the highest callings of being a human being. And so the idea that the word useless, which has a largely derogatory implication, could be associated with what I considered an absolute imperative of a developed society is to generate new knowledge. That it took me some time before I could appreciate the title the way Robbert has just described. And I think it explains why it is so hard to make the case.
Right. It's a tough case. It's a counterintuitive case, and it is a difficult word to get your head around.
Yeah.
It really is. Yeah. Vartan, yes.
Yeah, I think when I first read Useless Knowledge, I remembered game theory.
Mm-hmm.
It was recognized so many years later.
Right.
It was useful knowledge.
Right.
So useless for the moment. As one of the Nobel laureate chemists you quoted, he said, not applied yet.
Right.
Waiting for application. It also reminded me that the part you mentioned, almost laughed at when maybe it's a euphemism, because somebody asked Scavengers Union head, who's multimillionaire in Los Angeles, are you in garbage business? He said, no, I'm in used food business. So you can always rationalize things, but most importantly is you never know what will happen. Dickinson Richards, who got Nobel Prize in medicine, circulation of blood, he accused me once when he said, are you historians? That historians have retarded the course of science for centuries. I said, why? They had overlooked in their translation. Galen never said that blood does not circulate. Somebody mistranslated it, and we got stuck for centuries accusing ancient men for being not smart enough, intelligent. So you have always to revisit what is useful now, what is in the bank for future use, but nothing is useless because it's creation of human genius and others, and you never know when his calling will come.
Right. Robbert.
I mean, it's interesting that it's very difficult to prove that a piece of knowledge is truly useless. I have a colleague who's a number theorist, and there's this wonderful book by G.H. Hardy, the Oxford-Cambridge mathematician, A Mathematician's Apology, and he says he's a number theorist because number theory has no use. So that's actually its pure beauty.
Right.
And of course now it's being used every day in coding of our messages.
Right.
And this number theorist, he wants to actually prove how you can decode the messages and thereby liberate his wonderful field number theory from its usefulness.
You remember Senator Proxmire? Senator
Proxmire.
Proxmire every year in the Senate used to pick up one National Science Foundation or NIH grant and make fun of it. All the senators laughed.
That's right.
The one I remember, the most important thing he did was mosquito's eye that was being examined, $1 million or $2 million grant was given. Everybody laughed. But when malaria issue came, Senator Proxmire apologized.
Right.
And I had proposed that Senator Proxmire's thesis on economics receive an award similar as Golden Fleece Award.
Golden Fleece, right.
Because it was no longer relevant. But now after hearing Usefulness of Useless Knowledge, I cannot say that anymore.
Right. Your point about game theory certainly resonates. Of course, it started here. And in my experience as economics editor, if I'm right, it wasn't until the 80s that anybody could make any sense of it. And after that, it spread like wildfire through the social sciences.
No prize for it, and then people say, what is that? You start reading about it.
Right.
So there's a wonderful 20th century geneticist named Sidney Brenner, who was very important in the Human Genome Project. And he was once asked, you know, in the early days after the sequencing of the human genome, when there was a lot of DNA that we didn't understand, somebody said, well, isn't that DNA just junk? And Sidney said, there's a difference between junk and garbage. Junk is what you put up in your attic until you can find a really good use for it. Garbage, you throw away. So he referred to this as junk DNA, and of course his prediction turned out to be absolutely true. Today, we know that that DNA for which we had no function at the time turns out to be incredibly important in organizing and regulating the structure of the genome. So distinguishing junk and garbage turns out to be really important.
Right. I'd like to ask a question of Vartan Gregorian. In thinking about the history since Flexner, there have been moments and periods when the society has stepped up and invested. And I think of the period after the Second World War as one such moment. I think of Sputnik as another such moment. And I'm just wondering whether these examples make sense and what we can learn from them.
Let me go back to 1863.
You go right ahead.
No, really.
Yeah, sure.
President Lincoln, in the middle of Civil War, great tragedy to fall on this nation, launched Morrill Act, founding of our public universities, in the middle of Civil War. He established National Academy of Sciences, 1860, in the middle of Civil War. He established a commission on metric systems, see whether the United States should adopt metric systems. I'm saying this because can you imagine somebody in the middle of Vietnam War or World War II to do this? As happened to be, World War II was another one. Roosevelt, thanks to Vannevar Bush, door relation, President Bush, MIT, had a commission to study future of science. No report, maybe other than Flexner's 1938, has had the greatest impact on science in the United States, the Vannevar Bush's, the journey of science, whatever the exact title is.
Science, the Endless Frontier.
Yeah. But he died. Truman, who was always accused not to be well-cultured, well-educated, knew the importance of it. So all the national laboratories, everything was established on the basis of that report. National Science Foundation was created. So it's not wartime, but rather great leaders who sees great historical opportunities, thinking in advance for 20, 30, 40, 50 years. And then take also the Liberty Bonds. Liberty Bonds were launched World War I and World War II in order to keep our armed forces and others, but they're also used for other purposes. Now I'm trying to see what we can revive that for university fellowship. But it's a long shot, whether it happens or not. But you're right, I mean, that's the kind of leadership issue that somebody comes. Sputnik was the other one. Did a lot for our languages. But we as a nation, we're crisis prone. The crisis comes, we rise to occasion, and then Soviet Union is not there. We abolished all the language departments that we had built. So for now, another Cold War comes, so we have revived Middlebury and all of the language schools again. We can no longer afford this kind of crisis to crisis. Only people who think in advance are corporations, not governments now in the United States, and not necessarily universities even, because of income you cannot project.
Are we distinctly different from other countries in that regard? And if so, whom do we have to learn from?
Well, yes, we are completely. But I cannot explain anybody our K-12 education system. I cannot explain. 16,830 schools around the nation, 50 states, many municipalities, different forms of supporting it, and no common curriculum for the nation. Yet we want to compete internationally. We have some of the best public schools can compete, but not the system.
Right.
Budget.
Right.
My friend Jean-Marie Guéhenno was Mitterrand's assistant. Recently, 2 years ago, said Hollande has asked him to go work on defense budget of France. I said, are you kidding? How much will it take? 2 months.
Right.
What? I visit everybody, ask what it is, take to the president, he takes to assembly, we approve. That's it. Try to have that budget now. Subcommittee of the subcommittee of subcommittee of subcommittee.
Right.
This, everybody. Those are all, budget is politicized, everything is politicized.
Right.
So we have a peculiar system, comes handy once in a while like now,
Right.
because all the governors can slow down if something bad is going to happen. But not necessarily.
I have a question for Shirley. You have a paper, a 2014 paper, co-written by Harold Varmus, Bruce Alberts, and one or two other of your very distinguished colleagues on the crisis in funding as it affects the field of biology. Would you care to tell us a little bit about that as it applies to this larger problem?
Yeah, I think the crisis that we wrote about in 2014, which has only been exacerbated since then, the crisis has only gotten worse. It can be described extremely simply, which is it is too many people chasing too few dollars. And one of the things that I've come to appreciate about science, I've always believed that science is a competitive endeavor, that the competition is actually a good thing. It is a stimulus. It encourages innovation in many ways. But there's a tipping point. And when you reach a tipping point where competition becomes hyper-competition, which is where we are today, what happens is risk-taking, and Robbert referred to this in his remarks. Risk-taking goes down because there are so few resources and so many people are seeking those individual resources that no one is willing to take a chance. And the other thing I've learned over many, many years as a scientist, that if you are not willing to take risks, if you are not willing to do the audacious experiment, try the new idea, then science will just simply be boring. It will be, dotting I's and crossing T's, and that's where we are at risk today. And I think it's really the heart of what we were trying to say in that paper, that the system got to where it is for a whole variety of reasons, but at the moment it is making it particularly difficult for young scientists to establish their careers. And if we are not encouraging the young, and I see a number of my Princeton colleagues in the audience who are of an age, but I suspect you will agree with me that science is a game for the young. And if we're not encouraging the next generation to get into science, our future looks really grim.
Robert. If I can add something to it, of course, here at the Institute we do feel that we like swimming against the current, which actually is actually invigorating. But one thing I worry about is some of the stories I hear here, where of course scholars who come to the Institute, they're free to pursue anything they want. But that we have discussions that they indicate, well, after this, I have to have a career. Right. And the outside world is in some sense is so determined in long projects, very much goal directed, with predicted deliverables and all the metrics that come with it, that they say, well, it's in some sense almost a waste of time to appreciate this kind of few years of bliss here at the Institute if I have to transition to another world. And I think this is actually even more worrying. And it's important to realize that we can of course, we rely on politicians and policymakers and others to present the research environment that we have. But part of it is also self-governed. And many of the things that we deplore, some of the metrics, they actually come not out of the heads of politicians. They actually come out of scientists who have devised these methods in the sense that we want to quantify everything, so we also want to quantify ourselves. Right. But we are a little bit victim of that. So I think it's also about a movement inside the academic community to fight for our principles and values.
Well, go ahead, Vartan.
There is another problem. When I came as freshman in 1956 to Stanford, I swear throughout my entire stay at Stanford, nobody talked about money. You are going to be a nurse, you are going to be a doctor, you are going to be a librarian, you are going to be a teacher. Nobody said, are you crazy? Are you going to start a salary of $35,000, $40,000? It never came.
It was just, you were in a university to be what you want to be and go serve the nation. Now, everybody talks about money first.
Every freshman has a startup.
Yeah, it's just incredible, incredible. And so the idea with our public teachers have to start with 35, 40,000, after 30 years, 25 years, end up $70,000. And they have no respect for them to begin the profession. We're living in a place where everybody is judged, tell me how much you have, then I'll tell you who you are. And that's also about consumerism and all kinds of things that people see that they're urging. I can tell you billions. I had never realized that watching Casablanca, I was watching Lucky Strike, sale of Lucky Strike cigarettes. I never noticed that. But everything is surrounded, all over movie scenes, everything to advertising. And people see they cannot afford that. There's a lack of competition. And that's another thing we have to overcome. And that's one of the nicest things about these scientists. They're engaged, they're in love with their subject. They're possessed with their subject. Curiosity has given them the wings to aspire. And they know they will not starve, but they know they're not going to, somebody else will make money off them, but they're not going to be themselves. So be it, they think, because they're calling. We don't have calling anymore, we have jobs rather than calling. And one thing I do tell my students in the past, I did say, that to read the Love in the Time of Cholera, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, when there's a line there, so people are not born once and for all when their mother gives birth to them, mothers give birth to them. But throughout their lives, they give rebirth to themselves. And many times over, different professions. That's the kind of beauty that some of the scientists live with, and I'm trying to praise them, because they need the praise. Creating all these things, making billionaires without envying them, and without people saying you don't know what you're doing. Well, if I were the scientist, I would say I made you rich, so stop, and you're paying taxes because of my invention. But the culture has changed. Everybody publicly discusses their salaries, their benefits. Even young men, 25, 26, assistant professor, asked me when I used to interview, what's the retirement benefits? My God, you're 25, wait till you become 65. I said, I can only assure you that Florida Oranges would not be there, Anita Bryan will not be singing for you, and so forth. But anyway.
Speaking of beauty and the pursuit of science, I've heard Robbert speak on several occasions about the importance of imagination in the work of scientists. And it kind of jumped out at me in your essay when you talk about this Dutch chemist, this 19th century Dutch chemist, who cataloged the reading habits of several hundred scientists to make a point. Why don't you tell us about that?
Yeah, it's Van 't Hoff, who was actually the first Nobel laureate in chemistry.
Right.
And he was accused of being too imaginative.
Right.
Because he just figured out what things were instead of methodically climbing there. And then his first public lecture, he actually did this scientific experiment. He looked at 200 famous scientists, basically from Bacon on, and put them in 3 different groups. Those without imagination, so no interest in poetry and arts, or those with imagination. And then there's a third category, which is really funny, which is with too much imagination. And so that includes Newton, Leibniz, because Newton was interested in alchemy and everything. And he makes the case very convincingly that it's the third group that has had the biggest impact. And it's remarkable that I think we somehow are undervaluing imagination, because I think the remarkable thing is of the whole scientific enterprise is that people discover new things, new insights that aren't visible, that aren't there yet.
Right.
And so how did they ever come up with these ideas? And I think it's the wonderful human ability to imagine things that are not yet here. And you see this particularly clearly, I think, as we just talked about, with young scientists and scholars, because they come fresh to the field. And I describe this, this wonderful edifice that we all built. And they come and they look at it and say, wait a moment, something is missing. And it's remarkable that you can be in your early 20s, and you see that a major element in this big construction of science and scholarship is missing. And it's the power of imagination.
I did not mean to say that all writers, philosophers, and others don't care for money. Voltaire was a speculator of grain and all kinds of, so just wanted to call
Certainly no Princeton University Press authors do. Well, we have a book to publish here, and we have a case to make, and we have an argument to get across. And the challenge for us is to connect the dots out there and to try to discover people in leadership positions who can help us. And for you, I'd like you to help me, each of you, making reference to identifying a certain group of leaders who we should be appealing to and who we should be encouraging. Shirley, I mentioned to you earlier that I had sent a copy of this book to probably 50 university presidents. I've been getting lots of letters back, and I would think that that they're a prime group to help influence this debate. And given your distinguished background, I wonder if you might comment on what they might do.
So I agree that they are an influential group, and a group who are running, particularly those who run the research universities, are running institutions where a significant fraction of their mission is the generation of new knowledge, including useless knowledge. So in a way, they are preaching to them is preaching to the choir. I think the question for me would be, who do we have to convince? You know, who are the people for whom this is not an obvious sell? And you know, I think one place to begin, and this we've alluded to this. I think Vartan and Robbert in their remarks both alluded to this. I think there are leaders of major corporations in this country who could be far more effective than they currently are in speaking out in favor of fundamental and basic research. Now, there are some who do this, and actually one of the people who I think has been most effective over the years has been Bill Gates. Bill has spent a lot of time speaking about this issue, both nationally, but also most importantly in Washington. Paul Otellini, who was the CEO of Intel, is another one who has spent a very significant fraction of his time making the case not for applied research, because those companies know how to do applied research, and most of them believe they do it better than universities do. But for the importance of creating the seed corn, which is what basic research ultimately is, that is going to feed the future Microsofts and Intels and Mercks of this world. So if I were going to try and influence a group, that's the group that I think needs to be out there making the case.
That's an excellent suggestion, and I will get a list from you. Vartan.
Oh yeah, let me mention, I wish you had asked my opinion before you sent those books to presidents.
Oh, okay.
Because
There are more. We have more copies.
because you should have sent the board of trustees of universities.
Sure. Yeah.
Because they have an obligation to be trustee,
Right.
which means the fate of an institution is entrusted to you. I remember, as we like, you could ask one of the librarians to check out, in 1928, before Depression, Sun paper, which was published in New York, there are the lions there, the York Public Library lions, and all the billionaires have lined up with $1 million bills feeding the lions. So the lions are hungry, all right? But that's what it is now. Trustees are one, and also some enlightened, as you mentioned, some enlightened philanthropists who do what they preach. Best defense of learning, best defense of liberal arts was made by the head of DuPont, who was head of President of American Philosophical Society. I read that with our freshman class to the parents. They thought he was a dean of arts and applied sciences propaganda. I said, no, he's the head of DuPont. What my children can do. Your children can do what head of DuPont says. Oh, he wants this, wants that. So then also military. I found military are so much more enlightened, officer corps, special type officer corps, than many of our politicians. I think
That's not so hard.
National Defense, National Defense, University, West Point, and others, in order to be able to instill in their officers the love of learning. And last point I will mention, because it's in the papers, people who are veterans who came from Iraq and Afghanistan with GI Bill, very few are able to graduate from community colleges even. Until 2-3 professors, I was told, Yale and Harvard professors, brought these soldiers or officers to seminar. We know what they asked them to read: Thucydides, Herodotus, and Alexis de Tocqueville. Gave them perspective upon life. It was not just a constitution, but rather a kind of intellectual, historical footing. Some of them are enrolled already, Yale and Harvard and others, because the motivation was that those are the kind of people who love to be spokesperson for this. If I were being very cynical now, which I'm not, forgive me for that, I would have put National Endowment for Arts and Humanities in Pentagon. It will make 1/10 of 1% of one less than that, or whatever, one infinitesimal thing, and nobody can cut Pentagon budget. How about that? To ensure national heritage.
Okay, we got a list from you too. Robert, why don't you address this question last, and then we can take some questions from the audience.
Well, I would all agree with these suggestions, but I think also there is a larger audience to reach. So I fundamentally believe that the things that we're talking about tonight are resonating with a large percentage of the people, young and old, from various backgrounds.
Right.
I think a large group, a large percentage is innate curious, is imaginative, and appreciates the things that we're talking about. Sure. This is not about, one thing of science and scholarship has always been is a great social engine, and the talent has been widely dispersed in society. Right. So I think there's also a task where, in some sense, I would say, we should reach out to the voters. Right. We should reach out to the public at large, and particularly, I think, the younger generations. Right. And the worst thing we could do is kind of underestimate, also here in this country, the intellectual curiosity of the public at large. And I think it's, of course, they love to hear about the latest discoveries, but they also they can identify with the qualities that are exemplified by science and arts, because in many ways they're truly human values. Right. All of which in our lives are imagining things, are creating solutions, are wondering what our positions in this vast cosmos are. Right. And so I think something that really makes us human. Right.
Can I just sort of react to what Robert said? I think that there's a contradiction right now in the way in which science is being perceived, at least here in the United States. I can't speak more broadly. Because on the one hand, I think Robert is absolutely correct. I think there is an inherent fascination about science, about the deep questions about where did we come from, where are we going, the kinds of questions that scientists address, deep curiosity about it. On the other hand, we all have to recognize that science is under duress. Scientific knowledge is being questioned, and we have highly educated individuals questioning the value of vaccination. Think about that. These aren't uneducated people who are doing this. These are highly educated people questioning the value of education, of vaccination. I think, and we all have our examples. The fraction of the United States population that does not believe in evolution, it is stunning. It is stunning. I've had students at Princeton who have taken a course that I taught with Rosemary Grant on evolution, who come up to me at the beginning of the semester and tell me they don't believe anything I'm about to say for the next 12 weeks because they are creationists. You know, we have, and don't get started on climate change. So I think we've got this contradiction, and I think we need to really begin to understand what is the underpinning of that contradiction, because until we do, I think making the case for science is going to be harder. While we are in such, you know, where there was such a fraction of people in the United States simply don't believe what scientists are learning about the natural world.
They don't even know papacy, Paprio, then recognized the Big Bang theory without realizing. Now, when I quote him, I said, how do you think the Pope is wrong? They cannot say the Pope is wrong. But one other thing will be to send the book to all the editors, newspaper editors, especially small size,
Right.
and also send it to, believe it or not, there are 564 ethnic publications in New York. Send it to them too. Maybe they'll translate in different dialects and so forth. Because that's.
I'm going to need another list.
Okay. But I'm sending to all my board and all my colleagues copies of the book.
Excellent.
So I guess you have at least 125 copies.
We have as many as you need, okay?